This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Khaled Assaleh, the Vice-Chancellor Academic at Ajman University in the United Arab Emirates. Now, I'm just going to introduce you by name, but I'd like you to tell us what's your professional story and your personal story as a leader and a learner?
Okay. Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I know you've talked to a series of academic leaders, and I'm honored to be the, as you said, number 50 in this series. I started my engineering career, or actually education, in Jordan. I grew up in the country of Jordan in the Middle East. And even before joining university, I was fond of electronics. I used to have a little lab at my house at the time, and I used just, get transistors, diodes, resistors from old TV sets, from old radios, and so on. This was in the 80s, actually in the late 70s, early 80s. So I knew exactly that I wanted to go and study electrical engineering. I was fond of electronics. And as you probably know, in Jordan, we follow the American model. So there is no electronic engineering. It's called electrical engineering, but it has electronics and other areas of electrical engineering. So I really enjoyed that as a hobby before I even joined the university. So I knew exactly what I wanted at the time, and I joined the university in 1983, University of Jordan. At the time, Jordan had a few universities, maybe 3 universities. In contrast with the picture now, it has about more than 30 universities, the same country with some growth in population, obviously. So Jordan University is considered the elite university in Jordan, still the #1 university. So I was privileged to join the university at the time and start my engineering at the time, because you cannot enter electrical engineering directly. You will have to join engineering, and then based on your GPA in the first year, then you will, declare your major. And it's competitive at the time. It's still, I think, the same, but at the time, electrical engineering was on top of the list. And if you didn't make it, then you would be studying something else that you probably didn't like. So I was very lucky, and I made it to electrical engineering, and I started the journey of, it's a 5-year journey. The first year is the general engineering, and then the 4 years I did the electrical engineering, as you know, the typical electrical engineering curriculum. And I was very fond, like I told you, of electronics. So I was just waiting for the very first course in electronics. And at the time, my professors were surprised that, I knew a lot at the time. I mean, relative to my colleagues who were introduced to electronics for the first time in their lives. I mean, this is the first time they hear about PN junction, diodes, transistors, and so on. And for me, I used to play with these things when I was in high school. So my professors at the time were, very happy that someone is, well tuned with what they're talking about at the time, and I could see these things in a better way than my peers at the time. So anyway, I continued my degree, and I graduated in 1988, and I also had a goal at the time that I wanted to go to the US. I wanted to go join a graduate program. Even at some time, I thought that I would go to the academic path. So as you know, this would require a PhD. So I went to the US in 1988, at the end of 1988, joined a small program in electronic engineering in Monmouth University in New Jersey, which is known as was known as Monmouth College at the time. I graduated in 1990, and I kind of shifted from my being fond of electronics to being fond of software in a way. So I took a course in digital signal processing at the time with a professor who made it very, very enjoyable. And it was at the time, as you know, this was like in 1988, 89. You know, the somehow a new revolution of digital signal processing and its applications. Also, the beginnings of what we call today AI, you know, pattern recognition, machine learning, and so on. And then I shifted my interest from hardware and electronics to this area. And I decided that this is what I want to do in terms of research. So I did my master thesis at the time in video compression, you know, low bitrate video coding and so on. And I decided to then continue my PhD. I moved to a bigger university, Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey. At the time, 1990, I guess, this is when I started my PhD with a full assistantship, research assistantship. I joined at the time a research center, CAIP, CAIP, and I started working on wavelets. I don't know if you are in that area or people in that area know that there was, again, a big, you know, buzzword at the time in wavelets, and it was started by or pioneered by one very famous scientist, a lady called Ingrid Dobschis, and she was at Bell Labs at the time. And I had the honor of meeting her, and I got introduced to this area, which ironically was very related to what I did in my master thesis. It was low bitrate coding. And essentially, if you translate this in the language of mathematics, that was wavelets, you know, between the language of engineering and the language of mathematics. So I started working in that area with a couple of professors at the time who were at MIT and came at Rutgers. I did that for 1 year until one of the, I guess, the greatest people in the area of speech processing and speech recognition, the late Jim Flanagan, who was a department head at Bell Labs and just moved to Rutgers University at the time as a vice president for research, and a professor, also a researcher in the research center where I was a research assistant at the time. And I took a course with him at the time in speech processing. Part of it was speech recognition. Obviously, everything I learned in wavelets and you know, image processing and so on was two-dimensional. This was like one-dimensional signals, which is probably easier to even deal with. But the area itself, speech recognition, was very fascinating, at least to me at that time. And I started working with Professor Flanagan. And again, this is when I knew that this is the person that I want to work with as my advisor. So I was lucky to take the course with him and join his group. In that group also was a younger professor at the time, Professor Richard Mamon, who also was part of the speech recognition effort. And at the time, I started working with both of them as advisor and co-advisor. And I ended up working on very related area to speech recognition, which is speaker authentication. This is when I did my research, my PhD research for about 3 years. And I ended up with a new technique that was patented at the time, and it was the core of my PhD dissertation, which I defended in 1993. So I don't know if you want me to continue.
So can we just stop there for a moment?
Sure.
What was it like being an international student in America at that time, and an international student in two different kinds of universities, a small university and a very large and complex university as Rutgers is? but then also in an area like engineering, the area of engineering that you are focusing on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Coming from Jordan, a small country in the Middle East, and you're talking about the 80s, the world was very, very different. There was no, even satellite TVs were not there yet. Satellite channels were not there yet. So you're really confined to the area you live in. So the world at the time, to me, was Jordan. Jordan was like the entire world. And I didn't really know much about the US, except, from movies, TV series. At the time it was I think Dallas or whatever. So that's the image I had about the US. So it was a very steep cultural shock. A boy at the time, I was 21, 22 years old, who was 100% dependent on his parents, taking my allowance, never worked, never been independent in that sense. I lived with my family, a large family, about 9 siblings. We were 10, a big family in Jordan. Yeah. Moving to the US, and even to that part of the US, the Northeast, we're almost in the New York area. And actually, I spent the first week in New York with a friend who hosted us for the first week until we moved to New Jersey, because I had a colleague with me at the time. We were traveling together, which made it relatively easier. But I can't describe how big the cultural shock was. It was amazing. I mean, everything was different. Everything around me was different. The culture, the scenery, even the language. I studied in English. I spoke English. I understood English, but I've never interacted with Americans, because my professors who taught me in Jordan were Jordanians. And when they used to teach, as you might imagine, they would, kind of mix Arabic with English. And if you were to ask a question, you would ask in Arabic. There was no issue with that. And even if you strictly spoke in English in the lecture in Jordan, students would look at you like, are you trying to show off or something? So it wasn't an environment where you strictly spoke in English. And also the accent, the American accent is different from the British accent and the other accent. And my professors came from different backgrounds. And of course, they had the Jordanian accents or the Arab accent when they spoke English. So that was another thing, that all of a sudden you find yourself surrounded by different people, different norms. Like I said, also life in the dorms. This was the first time for me to live in a dorm, and at the time was a co-ed environment. An Arab boy coming from a Middle Eastern country, all of a sudden, you find yourself in this environment. It was quite different, but I have to say that I assimilated relatively quickly, got used to it, simply because, started my academic life in a way, which is the thing that I did best at the time, studying and going to lectures. And I was also a tutor at the time. From the very first month or so, I was tutoring students from in the Department of Electronic Engineering at the time. So yes, the environment was very different. The timing also. I arrived in New York on the 29th of December of 1988. And you can imagine, I've never also in my life experienced the weather like that. I mean, when I went to my university in West Long Branch, about 1 hour drive from New York City, it was like a white blanket. Everything was white, snow and all that. Of course, fascinating, but it was, to me, freezing. I mean, I've never seen something like that, So it was, I should say that it was enjoyable. I had the full support from my faculty members, my colleague, my professors, I'm sorry, at the time. I took 3 graduate courses, and the also international office at the time was very much prepared to embrace international students with some activities and assigning mentors for them. This was at Monmouth University. My mentor was a colleague at the time from Greece, who came from, not very, very different culture than the Middle Eastern culture. So that was very, very helpful. I think the other part of the question was about, you asked about the cultural differences and?
Yes, and being, I was an international student studying in Michigan, and a bit like you, I arrived there and had my first winter, and I'd lived in Queensland, and Queensland was subtropical. So the Michigan winter was just awful for me. And living in a dormitory, I'd never lived in a dormitory either with other students. So it was that sort of cultural transition that was really quite challenging. But you've talked about a couple of mentors and a couple of your professors. What was it about them that you actually inspired you, but also helped shape you as a leader and a learner?
Yeah. About professors, in the very first semester, as I mentioned to you, I took 3 graduate courses, one of which was optical communications, with a professor who was actually an adjunct professor. He was a full-time researcher at Bellcore, which was a part of Bell Labs or subsidiary of Bell Labs. And he taught that course at Monmouth. And he was from Egyptian origins, Dr. Ali Al-Rifai. Who really shaped my life completely. I mean, he knew exactly where I came from, because he himself came from Egypt probably 20 years before I did, and he kind of understood the challenges, the psychology, and even the career path and what needs to be done and so on. So he had a huge influence on me. He was like, a role model. At the time, he was obviously very well established and, older person, and had his family, his children. So he kind of embraced me and my other colleagues who came from Jordan. And he used to invite us to his house and, spend some time with his family. He even invited us at the time to his office at Bellcore, and kind of inspired us at the time that this might be the path that you want to do, you want to take. Make sure that you focus on your research and your studies, and this will take you further and so on. I guess because he understood like I said, the psychology and the way of thinking of someone who came from that part of the world. So he did have a huge influence on my entire career, because every time I look back at what I went through, it was very similar to what he actually did, especially in the part of my career in the US. Another person who really had a great influence and was a great inspiration was Professor Harris Drucker at the time, who was the department head, Department of Electronic Engineering. Again, he was a great mentor. He pretty much identified potential on me and my colleague who were together most of the time. I have a friend who's now in the US and still works in the US, Abdullah. So Professor Drucker also was a great mentor, and he led us through the master's degree. And he was the one who recommended at the time that you must go to Rutgers and you must, join the Cape Research Center and so on. So these 2 individuals, what I can think of, the very first 2 professors that I think made a very, very significant mark in my career and the shaping of my career in the US.
Now, you also worked in industry, and you worked in very complex organizations, such as the Motorola,
Yes.
and also Rockwell Semiconductor Systems.
Yes.
When you think about that experience in the corporate world, have you been able to translate that experience into your life in universities?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this is one thing that I mentioned about Professor Ali Al-Rifai, who at the time gave me a great advice, and it made so much sense. He said, don't go to academia right away. You're coming from a part of the world where there is not much industry, if you ever go back to the Middle East, especially at that time. So he was the one who made it very clear to me that I should start my career with industry, and probably end it, but I didn't even know that I was going to go to academia when I started my career with industry. So my story with Motorola at the time is quite interesting, because I never planned to join Motorola. I was in New Jersey, and there was no presence of Motorola in New Jersey. My ultimate goal was to join Bell Labs. And this is where, the ultimate honor is to work for Bell Labs and so on, where I did actually part of my training. When I did my master's degree, I was at Bell Corp, subsidiary of Bell Lab. I think it was the right decision for me to join industry as opposed to academia. And the way it came about is that there was a consortium at Rutgers for speech recognition and speaker recognition, where it was organized by the Department of Defense, where they invited top researchers to be at Rutgers University and to convene there for, I believe it was 5 or 6 weeks, and physically be there. Everyone was assigned a workstation. At the time, Sun workstation was the most powerful computers. And everyone was working on their algorithms for speech recognition. And they were supposed to report on their findings and discuss everybody's different techniques at the time. So I was very fortunate to be the representative of Rutgers University. I was obviously the youngest person at the time. I was still doing my PhD in the very final phases. This was in 1993. So I met this person who was from Motorola at the time, and we started talking, and he was kind of, interested in things that I do and so on. And it just, sparked like this. After that, he, emailed me and said, well, are you interested in a job at Motorola? And I said, well, I mean, where is Motorola? I said, Arizona. I said, Arizona? I don't want to go back to the desert. I came from the desert, because all my life was in the Northeast, and, the scenery, the vegetation, everything is different, but, just worked out. And he said, well, why don't you just come over for an interview? He arranged for the interview and so on. And it was just, based on this 1 month exposure when we hung out around together. And I went to the interview. I liked what I saw. As you might imagine, at the time, Motorola was the leader of the wireless communications. Specifically at the time, the pagers were the largest wireless communication tool before the cellular phones took over, and plus many other things that Motorola was making. Motorola was a huge company at the time, I think with more than 150,000 employees around the world. So I joined this research group, which was working on, again, speech recognition, speaker recognition, mainly for defense-related applications, command and control, and so on. So it was a very enjoyable part of my life. Yes, I had to somehow again adjust, to the completely different weather. Actually, similar to the weather of the UAE, except for humidity. So Arizona, Phoenix area. I was in Scottsdale in particular, very nice area. But then, of course, when summertime comes, the extreme heat comes with it. Overall, the place was very nice, and I stayed there for 3 years. Very enjoyable. I had a nice career with a nice group of people. Ended up with number of patents that I developed there, and then another opportunity came with Rockwell Semiconductor Systems. And again, at that time, I said, no, I'm happy where I am. I just got used to the place. So when a friend of mine contacted me to go and visit, unfortunately, when I saw Southern California, it was very difficult to say, okay, that I don't like this place, because it was beautiful, as you might imagine, Southern California, Orange County. So again, when I visited there, and I visited Rockwell Semiconductor Systems at the time, and Rockwell was a huge, glamorous company, as you know. But this particular sector was for semiconductors. And again, the biggest product at the time was modems. If you remember, when every PC had a Rockwell modem, and then they had the other products that are related to that, central site modems and so on. And one project that I was assigned is to, again, automate certain things with speech recognition and speaker recognition, mainly command and control again. But then shortly after that, the company started making the chipset for cellular phones. And that was actually the biggest supplier of Samsung at the time. So the very first, I remember, the very first speech recognition, it was mainly for name dialing and digit dialing at the time, by speech. Very primitive compared to today's technologies, Siri and so on. But I had the privilege of having the very first product in cellular phones that does speech recognition at the time. So
if I can just interrupt, what brought you back to Jordan and back into academic life when clearly you were being extraordinarily successful, really interesting work?
Actually, I didn't go back to Jordan. I came back to the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, where I am now, which is not far. It's only a 3-hour flight from Jordan, and it's very similar in terms of culture and so on. I think what brought me back is, now I look back at it, and maybe it's not so convincing for so many people, but at the time when I came back, I had my children, the first 3 of my children. I have 5 children, by the way. Couldn't get away from the big family syndrome, but still 50% of my father's production. So when my children, reached the school age, I just couldn't take it that my children didn't speak Arabic, and it was very, very difficult because, everything that surrounds you, obviously they go to school in English, and they deal with everybody in English. Even at home, we had to speak with them in English because they did not know Arabic. So that was one reason. It wasn't the strongest reason, but I visited the UAE in 2001, I believe, end of 2001, December 2001. And I had a friend. I visited for a conference at American University of Dubai. And I had a friend who, at the time, I knew he lived in the UAE, happened to be the Chancellor of University of Sharjah, who was my professor actually in Jordan. So I just gave him a call and said, Professor Isam, I am in Dubai and I would like to come and visit you. So by all means. So he was the Chancellor of one of the bigger universities at the time. It's still a big university, University of Sharjah. So, and he told me, what are you still doing in the US? You've been there for 13, 14 years. Isn't it time for you to come back to your roots or whatever? And I just, I said, well, and, just said, okay, well, just a remark. But that somehow kept resonating in my head. And when I went back to the US, I started thinking about, okay, maybe it's time to go back to the Middle East and continue my career there. And this is when I started searching for an opportunity. But like I said in the beginning, there wasn't jobs in industry that, require a PhD. You would be, super overqualified for the kind of jobs that industry needs in this part of the world at the time. So I then shifted to search for academic jobs. And this is when I, applied for a couple of universities, and I was at the time invited by the American University of Sharjah, where I started my academic career in 2002. And it was extremely rewarding. Like you said earlier, like the industrial experience was very much relevant in the teaching and in the mentoring and in the learning that my students enjoyed at the time, simply because I think you come with a completely different perspective. With the at the time it was 10 years of in industry, in high tech, in R&D, and developing products and so on. So that was I think very, very useful. In the courses that I taught the core of the research that I used to do in signal processing, signals and systems, artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, and so on. So yes, it was very, very much relevant. And I mean, it's not bragging or anything, but students used to kind of fight to get their graduation project with me, because I could only take 3 groups. And I always, I was very privileged to take the best students, because they would compete based on, their GPA and so on. And the best students ended up working with me. I supervised maybe more than 50 groups in about 10 years, and more than 40 or 50 master theses as well. And
So
they're all. Sorry?
What sort of teacher were you? Clearly, your students loved you. So,
well, look, when I explain things, I always explain, especially in electrical engineering in general, you don't see what you're learning, right? I mean, it's not tangible. You're talking about electricity, you're talking about current, you're even talking about signals, you're talking about waves. So I think I have a unique way of making the students see these things. Like when I taught the graduate course in signal processing, part of the course was about wavelets. And it's quite abstract, it's a very mathematical concept. But having used these, having developed products based on wavelets and subband coding and so on, I had a very, I would say, special way of conveying this information to students and making analogies in animations and so on. So this is the kind of teacher I was. In terms of conveying information, I think I have this, ability to do that. But at the same time, I wasn't very much liked when it came to grading. Students always branded me as a tough professor, you just, very, very limited A's or whatever. But at the end of the time, I always had full sections, and I really enjoyed teaching. I taught for about, maybe 15, 16 years. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to teach in this role that I'm holding now. I tried one time about 2.5 years ago when I was also in this position, and it was very, very challenging in the sense that you can't really give the time that you want to give to the students simply because of meetings, because of travel, because of other commitments. So I wish I could have the time to teach a course, at least one course, the way I used to do before.
So when you think of yourself as a teacher and an educator, what's important to you in that role?
I think it's very important to relate to the students, to the generation that you are teaching. One of the biggest mistakes that I think we faculty members do sometimes is that we want to teach students the same way we were taught. And I think this is the biggest mistake anyone can make, simply because you are speaking to a different generation everything has changed. The way of learning has changed. The resources have changed. You're no longer the only source of information, as you know, our professors used to be, when we just take notes and the only reference of you is your professor and so on. I think we are being now transformed into facilitators, mentors. Information is there. Students have access to information sometimes more than us. With everything that's going around us, and with the generative AI and this revolution that is happening, started, as you know, about a year and a half ago or something, and the access to information is enormous. And I think this is where professors need to adjust and to get out of this mode of PowerPoint presentations and being the ones who are speaking most of the time, thinking of themselves that they are the center of the learning process. I think this has to change, and if anyone who is not convinced with this will find out that they're getting somehow outdated, and they won't even grab the attention of students anymore. The engagement, or the attention span is getting very, very short for this Gen Z and even the earlier generation as well. So I think this is where we educators have to continue to learn. Not to think that, okay, I know it all. I am the master of my domain, and I know exactly this material, and this is the way it should be taught. I think that mindset must change for us to, maximize, if you will, this knowledge transfer. Okay, being facilitators more than the spoon feeding that was happening, especially in this part of the world.
So when you think of your job and your colleagues, your colleagues who are educators and researchers, what are the challenges that you're all facing at the moment? Because I mean, no university at the moment can really say, yes, we're having a really good time. There are multiple challenges at all sorts of levels.
Yeah, I think from the faculty point of view, I'm sure this is happening across all universities. The research productivity has changed. The good old days, I'm not sure good, but the old days when a faculty member or professor worked on a journal article for a year or so and submitted that journal article, waited for a year or whatever. I mean, these days have gone. Now we are in a collaborative world. You have people working with so many different research groups around the world, and you find majority of faculty members who are very, very productive. They end up publishing a good number of articles that sometimes you would say it's impossible for someone to be publishing 10 journal articles or 20 or whatever in a year. But if you think about it in the collaborative mode that we live in, that's the norm, and this is where everything is shifting to. So if someone sticks to their to the old norms, and okay, I will only do research this way, the old way I used to do it, and so on, they will find themselves lagging, and this is a great challenge. I mean, these people will not, in general, will not be renewed in terms of their contracts or tenure. They will not get tenured and so on. So this is one challenge in research, but I think majority of faculty are coping with this and learning how to do that. The other challenge, as I mentioned earlier, is in the student learning. I mean, we no longer, like I said, the masters of our domain, and the only thing that is the discipline that you teach, or the topic that you teach. You would have to cope with new learning and teaching methodologies. You would have to maybe even understand a little bit more psychology of these rapidly changing things around you with this generation that we are teaching. Universities, as you know, one of the biggest topics that are being discussed now, whether universities are sustainable in the same mode they operate with, whether this higher education system is going to be disrupted with all these resources that are being available and these MOOCs and upskilling tools that are there. Do I need a degree or not? This is what this generation is thinking about. Should I join a university for 4 years? And at the end of that, I would be learning something that might become obsolete, because with curricula that have to go through accreditation and different accreditation agencies and bodies and so on, you don't necessarily have the liberty to change these curricula at this very rapid pace that the job market is experiencing. So this is a challenge for universities to keep these generations interested in joining universities. So these universities have to redefine themselves quickly enough, much more rapidly than the accreditation standards, right? Accreditation standards do not necessarily change very fast. So this is why I guess most universities are investing in, if you will, co-curricular tools for upskilling students and for providing students with skills that wouldn't necessarily be available right away in the courses that are taught due to, again, the relative rigidity of accreditation requirements and standards. So in my university, for example, we have adopted Coursera, and Studio City is another one. But Coursera, for example, provides a huge number of courses and certificate programs for students in things that are related to what they're studying, but it's a lot more advanced and coming from the corporate world as well. So these are being taught by middle managers in different corporations, different areas like, in Google and Meta and so on, and IBM and also other providers. In addition to the soft skills and communication skills, employability skills. So I think this is a challenge for all universities, how to cope with all these rapid changes that are happening with technology and with the requirements of the job market. You want to graduate someone who is relevant to the job market, who would have the right, if you will, tools and skills to join and be desirable by these companies.
If you could change one thing to enhance the student experience, to ensure that they graduated feeling that they've learned something, what would it be? What would you do? What would you change?
I think one of the things that are relevant to this question is the interdisciplinary learning. Mm-hmm. I think students would have to maybe, or universities, if you will, would have to get out of this focused disciplinary approach. Students need to learn skills that are relevant to the job market, like I said, and they would have to, for example, soft skills, general education components, liberal arts and so on, would have to be integrated within the discipline in a way that shapes the students' not only personality, but also their approach of, in general, problem solving, dealing with peers and so on. As you know, this is in the heart of American education, where you have the general education component, which we follow. But the way most universities do it, it's looked at as a separate set of courses. And in my part of the world, students, for example, in professional degrees, like, in engineering or even in medicine or dentistry, whatever, they look at these courses that, okay, they're just required courses. I need to take this course, because it's required. I think what needs to change in the mentality and the mindset of students and professors alike, that these courses are as important as the courses within the discipline, and they need to be integrated with the curriculum, not to be thought of as, okay, something on the side. I just finished a course on, for example, on language, whatever the language is, or heritage, or culture, or innovation. Or I need to apply what I'm learning. I need to somehow, as a student and as an educator, I need to make this link so that I benefit from this course in the discipline that I'm studying. So that's, I think, one thing that would, I think, be a game changer if we were to embrace the general education component and somehow immerse it in the curriculum.
My last question is, what advice would you give to the current group of students that are in your university?
One advice that I give is to all students, especially, we're going to have our orientation program for the new students soon. And this is what I say all the time, is to live the campus life. You are not here to simply come and take your lectures and leave. You are here to live the entire co-curricular and extracurricular life. Get involved in student clubs, culture clubs, language clubs, and so on. Be a frequent visitor to the sports center. Try to get yourself involved in the different co-curricular or extracurricular programs that the university offer. Try to make the best out of these 4 years. This is the most enjoyable time any human being has, and it sticks with one for the rest of their life. So this is the advice that I give to students, because in our part of the world, sometimes this is overlooked. They just want to come, take the lectures, and let's go home. And one of the things that I always stress is to focus as much as you focus on your studies, also focus on taking advantage of all what the university offers as co-curricular programs. It helps in the mental well-being. It helps in shaping the character and the personality that you will have by the end of the time of the end of the study time that you have at the university.
Actually, I'm going to sneak in one last question. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, I would probably, I mean, that's too, it might not be politically correct, but I had a chance to join a university before I left the US. I got an offer from a very good university in California. And I turned it down and I moved to the UAE. I'm not regretting moving to the UAE, but I would have advised my young self is to take that opportunity. I would, prefer to have taken that opportunity at least for some time, so I would get the best of the industrial experience in the US, academic experience in the US, and then after that, I moved back to the region. So maybe that's one advice that I would have given to myself at the time.
Look, I have enjoyed our 52-minute conversation.
Likewise.
I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. And thank you for both telling your story, but also your insights of being an international student and that sort of transition from working in the corporate world into universities and your real commitment to students. So thank you for that. And I'll let you get back to the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Judith. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.